Right, so yesterday we had started talking about Bootstrap as a library that collects a lot of really good ideas on styling the front end, the forms, adding paddings, nice fonts. Also added a lot of ideas on how to make things that are responsive. And yesterday we had a chance to start styling some of our forms. Right, we applied it to a login file. We applied it to a couple of input fields, some buttons, and it was already starting to look a little more presentable. And we'll do more of that today. Here we have an example on how is that we can link the Bootstrap library into our project. In this case, we were linking to a CDN. Notice the Bootstrap CDN over here, and which allows us also to choose what version we want to use. In this case, we're using 4.1.3, is one of the latest one. Also notice the file that we're importing. It says bootstrap.min.css, right? This min over here means that this file has gone through a minimization process, right? That has removed all spaces, white spaces. It's any tabs, anything that we might have used for human beings to parse and make sense out of the file, but are irrelevant for machines, for the browser. Those have been all stripped away and made compress the file as much as possible. This is so that we can reduce the time that it takes to download these files. Typically, for development purposes, probably we would have a full-blown version of this, right, so that we can read it ourselves, right? And we're going to be using quite a bit this technique of using the minimization versions of CSS files, of JavaScript files, and whatnot. A couple other things here. Here we have a couple of classes that we're applying from the Bootstrap library. Yesterday we used one, right? I believe we used container yesterday, right? Which added margins on either side of the page. It centered our content. It started making it look pretty. This one is another one from Bootstrap, container-fluid. This one, the same thing. It adds some padding around, but it doesn't. It's whereas the one we were using, had centered the content. This one expands and takes as much space of the page as possible, although leaving a slight margin all around. So Bootstrap declares a couple of set of containers that allow you to make the content a little prettier, and typically they are declared at the top of your content, like in this div, and then you would put all the rest of the content in there. Grid system. So the grid system is one of the most important parts of Bootstrap that we're going to be using throughout the semester. If you remember yesterday, we had mentioned that we should not be using tables for laying out pages, especially if we were trying to achieve laying out content side by side, as in columns. Yes, and pre the use of CSS, it was very common to use table or misuse table for that purpose, right? To achieve these vertical columns. So what the grid system allows you to do is to achieve the same functionality that tables would allow you, but using only CSS. Right? It's going to be very, very similar to what you would be able to achieve with tables. But also it allows you to make these tables or pseudo tables to be responsive, right? To be able to adapt to the width of the page, right? So let's look at some of these grid system. These are all classes that are declared by the Bootstrap library, and it allows you to declare rows, and inside of those rows, it allows you to declare various columns in those rows, right? And it establishes the standard that is going to break up the horizontal width of the page into 12 equal parts, right? And that's going to be the smallest unit of content that you can possibly have using this grid system, right? So for instance, here we have an example of the 12 one unit width of these columns, right? There's 12 of them, and the size is here. They say 1. This is a column, and here we have one that spans 4 columns. This one that spans 8 columns, and you can combine them. You can combine them together so that 8 and 4 makes 12. Or you have 3 4s or 2 6s, right? Or 12 1s. Any which way you wanna break it up, you can combine them. and you can repeat it again. You can say these 8 spans of columns could be again broken up into 12 portions inside, right? So you could nest these to make them smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. I mean, this is pretty small, right? Even in a big screen, you'd be hard pressed to be able to put any meaningful content in there. Nevertheless, 12 is the standard, right? Why 12? Well, just because it's easier. It's easy to break up and divide 12 by any number of fractions. You can say 12 divided by 2, by 3, by 4, not by 6, 5, by 6, right? So you can have all sorts of ratios like that. This makes it easy. This is an idea that is borrowed from the publishing industry, right? Well, they use this kind of the same idea when they're publishing magazines or newspapers, right? So when they're laying out their contents on a piece of paper. So yeah, that's where the idea comes from, and it's been very successful. A lot of libraries do similar kinds of mechanisms, right, of splitting it up. Here's an example of creating a single row of multiple ones. Right, so we have an outer div with a class row, and then inside there we have 12 one size. Right, here's an example, another example where we have one row with 2 columns, one size 8, one size 4, another row with 3 rows of size 4, and so on and so forth. Now, most of you will have noticed that I'm kind of skipping what's in between here, right? It says column, that makes sense. The size, the span of how many columns you're spanning. This MD here is a token that tells us what size are you targeting, what screen size are you targeting. MD is for medium-sized screens, right? There's LG for large, XS for extra small, SM for small. And what this is saying is that I want this layout, right? I want to span 4 columns at this size of screen, right? Now you can combine several of these applied to the same exact column, right? To the same exact column, and say, as you move your screen, as you resize your screen, these rules trigger or don't trigger, right? So this rule will trigger, meaning this layout that this is 4 columns wide will trigger only when the screen is medium size. Okay? Yes.
And also when it's bigger than medium, so it's like.
Yeah, it's LG, large. I'm sorry.
So I mean, if you only read that, it will also trigger for large.
Yes. Thank you. So this says for a medium size and larger, right? So this layout is true for medium sized screens and larger screens, right? Yes. Yeah, you could apply multiple classes. Yep. And the ones that would say XS would only trigger for the extra small screens and larger, right? And obviously the larger override whatever the smaller ones are, right? So in that sense, what you could do is apply multiple of these rules in several of these divs and say, well, when you're big on big screens, right? I want to break it up into, I want to have 6 columns, yes, and so I want to have. I want to have 6 total columns, right? And of which each one is two columns wide, yes? And then as it starts becoming smaller and smaller, I might say, well, 6 columns is too much for a big screen. I might reduce it to 4, right? And when it gets smaller, even smaller, it'll become 2. And it was an extra small, it'll be just 1 big column that takes up the entire screen. Make sense? Right? And so you can lay it out and put all these rules so that they'll trigger at different sizes of the screen. Yes.
When you have nested ones, you divide up them into their columns. Is it best practice to have row right after? So like
Yes.
last row,
You
column, then
you will always wrap these instead of a row. Yep.
don't have to do container, right?
No, you don't have to container. So the container is only for the outside, right? For the outermost wrapper. Yep. So how is this achieved? Well, the way it's achieved is these rules. The browser early on when the browsers came out, they were thinking of says, well, while I'm visiting a web page, some of these web pages can be seen in are going to be consumed in a browser, but sometimes it might be consumed as in a printer, right? I want to print it, and I would like to have different styles, different CSS styles, for depending on the device that you're going to be consuming this content, right? So, for instance, whereas in a web page I might have animations and background colors and all sorts of really eye-catching things. Typically on a printout, perhaps I want to throw all that away, right? I just want to have just the plain text. So this is a mechanism that has been around for quite a while, even before the web exploded in its popularity. That allow you to target different devices, right? And allow you to configure, right, that depending on what device and depending on what size of the device, depending on what printer you were using, to choose that certain rules, that this CSS would only be applicable for this size of the window, and this other CSS would be applicable for another size of the window, right? And for printers, you would use one CSS, and for desktop, you would use a completely different CSS. So all those rules all that mechanism has been around for quite a while. Played really nice today, to be able to make things that can be targeted for really tiny screens or really big screens. And what Bootstrap has done, it has taken advantage of this mechanism that has been around for so long, that was never intended for any of this, but it's a great reuse of legacy, a legacy mechanism. All right, so part of the assignment asks you to create a left side, right-hand side layout, which you can very easily achieve using this grid system, right? You can just say I want a row, and on the left-hand side I'll have maybe a 2-column span, and on the right-hand side a 10-column span. And you could use this, for instance, for implementing. I think this will be an upcoming assignment. That allows you to have like a left-hand side of a list of the modules, and on the right-hand side the tabs and whatnot. That it's the main content, right, of the faculty as they edit their course. The breakpoints, when we say large screen, small screen, medium screen, this is what we actually mean, right? This Bootstrap has gone along and taken a look at the most common sizes for monitors out there, right? And common sizes for tablets and phones, and has standardized these sizes, right? So for instance, what it's meant by large is screens that are a minimum of 1170 pixels wide. Medium is anything that's larger than 970. Small is 750, and below that it becomes extra small, right? And again, they've done the studies on what are the most common resolutions out there for different mobile and tablets and whatnot. So these are the mechanisms that allow you to trigger which CSS libraries or which CSS files are going to be loaded depending on the size of the screen. So for instance, at the top of the HTML document, you can establish rules such as these, right? So that you can say the following CSS styles are going to be loaded when the screen goes between minimum width and the screen size, whatever the screen size for that particular mobile or that device's minimum size is, right? You can specify also the actual values, actual 900 pixels, 768 and whatnot, is specifically what is that you want to target at. Also in the assignments, you're asked to implement quite a few navigational mechanisms that allow you to navigate from one place to another. And Bootstrap has tons and tons of these widgets that are already created for you, and we encourage you to reuse them as much as possible. You can navigate through their documentation and look at what's already available to you. If you go to Get Bootstrap and look at the documentation, you can look at layout and or components, and in here you'll find all sorts of really good stuff that you're encouraged to use. For instance, inside of navigations, you have tabs, or you have tabs, and you can center them left, right, right-hand side. You can put them vertically. You can disable them. You can render them as tabs. You can render them as pills. And we encourage you to use a lot of what these snippets are already. They're already pre-configured. You can just copy it from here, copy, and then use them as part of your own implementation. Yes? All right. So we encourage you to use that. If you are using another CSS library, like materials, then feel free to use their layouts instead. Okay. You have other pills that you can expand and take up the entire width. Also from the forms, there's quite a few things there that you might want to take a look at. For instance, here's a form that renders from top to bottom, and you have forms down further that can render from left to right. Right. This is a form that renders from left to right, but as they become smaller and smaller, it's responsive, and then it flips. I think, maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of one that's below. Oh, there it is. So it flips. It flips from rendering from left to right to rendering from top to bottom. Yes? And I believe you're asked to implement quite a bit of those for the login, registration, and the profile page. So feel free to grab these snippets of code and use them for that. Also, here's an example of using forms, but rendering them from side to side, from left to right, as opposed to using those input fields taking up the entire width of the container. These are useful, for instance, at the top of the header, right, or at the footer, right, so folks can log in, right, or do a search. Some range controls, some checkboxes. Layout. Let's see what else. Form grid. So here's a form that it's taking, using quite a few other controls. Again, please revisit here before trying to invent it yourself. See if it's already here first. Right? There's galleries. If you have images that you're going to go through. So feel free to use what's here already. For navs. For navigation, well, I wanted to show nav bar. In certain places, you're asked to create nav bars that are shown at the top of the screen, right? Where you might have a logo for your company, right? Where you might have a login or some links that allow you to navigate quickly to other parts of the page. So take a look at how to create these nav bars. These nav bars can also be configured to be stuck at the top of the screen, right, or stuck at the bottom of the footer, right, so that everything else scrolls except the header, except the footer, right? And these are really nice, especially like in mobile and tablet applications, right, so that when as you scroll, you still have the header at the top or the footer at the bottom to give you that kind of interaction. So this goes through each one of the pieces inside of this example. The branding on the left-hand side, the buttons on the right-hand side. It just lists the examples of each one of these. In particular, the one that might be of interest is sticky. I don't know, where is it? Bottom. Placements, where you can place them fixed. You can fix them at the top so that it doesn't scroll with the rest of the content, or you can fix them at the bottom, right, to do the footers. And that's as easy as adding a class. It says, fix it to the top. Boom, it goes up to the top. Right? And same thing, content that is either justified to the left or justified to the right. There's a whole bunch of styles that you can say, just float it to the left, float it to the right, right? And things just are then justified to either side of the container. And we'll use quite a few of these as we go today and tomorrow and next week as well. All right. So I encourage you to visit and take a look at this library. It's very, very, very nice. Let's see. Here's some examples of using pills, vertical splits, navigation demo. All right. So let's just take a look at an example on using these libraries. Let's see. So yesterday, where were we? I think we were using WebStorm. Let's bring out that demo that we were using yesterday.